Well, first of all, what I'd like to ask about is, I'd like to talk about what you're doing today. This was an awful lot of fun with these really brilliant young people here. Mm. How long have you been doing the Young Poets competition?
28 years. This is the 28th year.
Did it start with you?
Yes, it's called the Illinois Poet Laureate Awards Competition. I was invited to be a Poet Laureate in January of 1968, and I felt, people kept saying, what does a Poet Laureate do? And I was told when I was asked to take this honor, accept this honor, that my duties would be commensurate with my pay, which is nothing. And I'm very glad to have it nothing, because that gives me an opportunity to think of things on my own to do, and I'm under nobody's official supervision.
What do you get from working with these young people in terms of their energy and their imaginations?
Well, I wish there had been such a competition when I was a little girl, because I started writing when I was 7. And there was nothing of this sort. Wasn't an interest in the schools either in creative writing. So I remember once I put a little extra flair into my composition. Might have been history, might have been English. And the teacher said, "Where did you get that? You couldn't possibly have thought of that all by yourself. Where did you steal it?" So then my mother came up to school and she said, "She doesn't have to steal. She can write better than you can." You wouldn't have expected her to say that. She was such a sweet, gentle little woman. But she was right.
When did you say you started writing when you were 7?
My mother told me that I brought her a page of rhymes when I was 7 years old. And she was so proud of me, and she said, "You are going to be the Lady Paul Laurence Dunbar." You've probably heard of that very famous poet, perhaps the first black poet to become truly famous in many places.
There were Dunbar societies around the country.
Yes, I think there still are. Mm-hmm.
I remember seeing that in our old yearbooks at the university. Mm-hmm. What really got you started? What inspired you to write poetry?
Well, it might have been because I had a father. Both my parents were interested in creativity and the arts. And my father would sing to my brother and myself. He would sing wonderful songs like "Asleep in the Deep." And sometimes on a stage I'll try to imitate it, but I won't at this point. And because I can't go down as far as he did. But he would tell us wonderful stories at bedtime, you know. He was one of those ideal fathers, really interested in their children. And I think it was only natural that one of us would have wanted to try to put some of that magic on paper. My brother was a very good painter. He didn't give the attention to his art that he should have done. And he died a long time ago.
When did you know that poetry was going to be your profession, your vocation in life?
Well, I didn't use such words. I never said vocation, profession. I just knew that I would write and keep writing as long as I was here, whether my writing was published or not. Yes. There was an immediate advantage, however, is when I was writing a poem, my brother had to wash the dishes. Of course, when he was painting a picture, I would have to wash the dishes, because there was that same interest in a child that was wanting to do something special.
That's very good that your parents were able to see the importance of that and inspire you both to do that.
Indeed, my father gave my mother a bookcase, which is now in my bedroom, a bookcase with the Harvard classics in it. That was his idea of a wedding present. Doesn't that indicate that he was a very special person?
Sure does. You met some incredible people on your way up. Langston Hughes, he took an interest in your work. Can you talk about the kind of relationship that you had with him?
Well, when I was 16, he came to read at our church, Metropolitan Community Church. Gee, I feel guilty saying that. I haven't been there in quite a while. But my mother insisted that I take some poems to the reading and show them to him after his offering. And when everybody was gone, we approached him. He read them. He was one of the kindest-hearted persons you would want to know. Many writers will be able to tell you that. And he said, "You're talented. Keep writing. Someday you'll have a book published." I met him when I was a married woman later on. I remember my husband and I gave a party in a 2-room kitchenette for him. Squeezed 75 people into that party. And he said it was the best party he had ever been to. And a couple of weeks later, he came by our little 2-room kitchenette and mounted the long flight of stairs that I described in my longish poem, The Sundays of Satin Leg Smith, and knocked on the door. Those were the days when you did things like that. You didn't call up and say, "I'm coming." Just knocked on the door. And we let him in. And we served him our dinner, which was mustard greens, ham hocks, and cornbread. And he loved it. He's a very natural, easy person to know and talk with.
A lot of your themes, a lot of your work is based on your experiences here in Chicago. How has Chicago influenced your work, the things you see in life? You described yourself a minute ago in the interview with that young man down there as a people's poet.
Well, no, I think I was careful to say a people poet, which is very different from a people's poet.
Okay.
I don't exactly know what that means.
Okay.
But I'm fascinated by what people do and their responses to this and to that. So I find myself writing about people more often than I find myself writing about daisies and dandelions, although I am interested in those also.
Why do people bring that out in you? Why are they your favorite subjects?
Well, for instance, it's fascinating to sit here and wonder what you're thinking is about this little episode. And I could use my imagination, and come up with something perhaps quite special.
Well, I'm thinking about it as I might sit down and write some of my own poetry.
Yes, you very well might.
Gwendolyn Brooks. Because I will probably do that. I love to write. I just started a little bit of it.
I see. You did write when you were a youngster, didn't you?
A little bit. But I'm doing it more now that I guess I know a little bit more about things, maybe. But I wish I'd started earlier.
Well, you're still very young. Just keep going, I would advise you.
Wait a minute, she's turning the
I'll
table.
start
She's
interviewing you.
She's interviewing me now. I don't know if that's fair, but it's a lot of fun. Some of the things that you said to the kids today, I'd like to ask you about that, if that's okay. You said that Poetry is a friend to whom you can say too much.
Mm-hmm.
What did you mean by that?
Yes. You can say just so much to any human friend. But everything can come out on that paper. You can put down anything that occurs to you. Well, at least I feel that way. I do meet a good many poets who say they cannot write down everything that they're thinking. Somebody might see it, but they don't want to see it. But I feel if you're that timid, you're not really a writer.
What does it mean to be a writer to you?
I was asked that question earlier. And what I can say is that I simply never thought of it in such terms. After my mother told me I was going to be the lady poet, the Lady Dunbar, I believed every word she said. Of course, I know now that no one wants to be like another poet. You want to be yourself. Be yourself, I say in a little book for children who want to write poetry called Very Young Poets. Be yourself. Do not imitate other poets. You are as important as they are. Now, many children are quite astonished to have me tell them that they're just as important as Shakespeare and Sylvia Plath and Charles Simic, especially Charles Simic. And think of some of your favorites.
T.S. Eliot, one of my
That's still one of my favorites too.
Pablo Neruda.
I like to read the language, but I can't say I love his poetry. Do you know the poetry of Okot Pipitek?
No.
He was, he's an African poet. Where was he born? I think. He has books called Song of Lawino and Song of Ocol, O-C-O-L. And Lawino is the wife, rooted in the past. She doesn't like modern ways, and he is just the opposite. Each one has a long, narrow poem. And if I were forced to, I believe I would say that Okot Pipitek is my favorite poet, if I had to say that. Though I think that's a very a bad thing to feel that you must say, because every poet worth his or her salt has got something special for the world.
Well, I'm not going to ask it in terms of why he may be your favorite poet, but what in
humor, I could tell you.
Yeah, what in his poetry speaks to you?
The humor of it, the sassiness of it, the absolute honesty of it, the way of looking at what's in this world, frankly. I'm not putting it very well at all, but I certainly do recommend him to you.
Well, a lot of people would say the same thing about your poetry, because I've seen some that's very lean, very sparse, but yet it gets the point across in very, very few words.
Well, that's good when it is true, but I have some very, very long, pretty poems. I have In the Mecca, which is half a book long. I have Winnie, which has its own little book. That's in, I'm writing about Winnie Mandela there. I think she's a much underrated person. And I've never met her, but I feel I'd do not want to meet her now because I spent the whole summer on this little book, and I really believe I have got the real Winnie Mandela. And I wouldn't want to run any risk of being disappointed. I don't think I would be, though.
It's been said of your work that poetry is distilling life, and you called it in front of the kids a while ago, you called it a delicious agony.
Yes, writing is a delicious agony. Wanting so much to get down on that paper what is in you, screaming or purring or whatever. And it's difficult.
When do you know that you've been successful, that you've gotten it right?
Mm.
When do you know that?
That is a question that I'm often asked, that everybody is asked. It's not a mystery for me. I know before I start writing what it is I want to achieve. So when I have achieved that I wanted to achieve, I stop. Many youngsters tell me, though, that they don't know when to stop, that they go on and on and on. And I recommend my idea to them, that they know before they start writing what it is they want to say.
Well, you can overwrite something, you can overpaint something. You should know when to stop.
Yes, I'm sure that's true.
What does your poetry do to explain, and I know you don't like the term African American, but what does your poetry do to help tell the story of black people in America?
Well, there are lots of stories. It's not just one black story. You talk to 10 blacks and you might have 10 different kinds of poem. I write there might be a person I know, happens to be black. Blackness has some degree of specialness for every black person. So every black person can tell you a different story. I don't like African American because it denies so many of us. Oh, I don't know if I can do this enough. Stop me if this is not the thing to do. I wanted to quote from Report from Part 2.
You go right ahead and find it, and we'll pick up there.
What is it?
I said, you go right ahead and find what you
Oh, all right.
Okay. And
Familyhood. The current motion to make the phrase African American an official identification is cold and excluding. What of our family members in Ghana, in Tanzania, in Kenya, in Nigeria, in South Africa, in Brazil? Why are we pushing them out of our consideration, out of our concern? The capitalized names black and blacks were appointed to comprise an open, sensitizing, wide-stretching, unifying, empowering umbrella. And that's the way I see it. I feel that blacks should consider themselves family. And people in Brazil cannot come under that African American umbrella, nor people in South Africa. About South Africa, there's something very interesting. When white South Africans come over here to join America, then they are African Americans. And I've said that to a couple of them, and they didn't like the idea at all.
I like what you have to say about that.
But I did want to stress that idea of family, and I think all blacks should be interested in whatever is happening to blacks in any part of the world.
That was something that was very, very powerful that came through with these young people today, because some of those kids were talking about experiences that I, as an adult, and a lot of people, should never have to know about as kids.
Uh-huh.
Losing friends, losing family to
Yes.
violence.
Being afraid to go out on your own street.
How do you think putting that into poetry and setting that into verse is a way of calling attention to those problems in our lives?
You don't object to it, do you?
Oh, not at all. No, I think it's wonderful that the kids are doing that. I guess what I'm trying to get at is how does this serve as a way to help people understand that this is a real problem and that we ought to be doing more about it?
It might say such as that to some people, but others, I'm afraid, it just floats over their heads.
What do you hope? What do you think? Okay. I guess that's what I was talking about.
At least you're keeping me. Have you started again?
Yes, we did. There were some very powerful things in what those kids were saying, and how does that make you feel as someone who's, I suppose, giving a wider voice to what those children are feeling?
There was the young girl who wrote about how she felt about her sister having a baby at the age of 14. And I thought that was a very powerful and sensitive poem with several layers to it. And she didn't have any answer at the end, perhaps you remember. She spoke of how the baby, she wished her sister could empathize with that baby, and she wished she could empathize with herself. She would like to, she wanted her to know how she felt. She didn't go any further than that. She didn't say, I feel thus and so. But it left it wide open to the imagination and perhaps the knowledge of readers.
Sometimes there aren't any easy answers.
No, there isn't any there. You can just, it makes you see that household, doesn't it? And hear the arguments that must be going on between the sisters. You could make up whole stories. The sister might want, the young mother might want her sister to take care of the baby. And you could just imagine what among many things she might reply to that desire. That's true of so many of those poems. They're many layered.
Yeah. I got that out of a lot of them, that they were operating on so many different levels, and those were kids who were dealing with things that I've never, thank God, never had to deal with. And my heart went out to them.
Yes.
Are you publishing those in the book? You're talking about that.
Oh, that's going to be a lot of work. See, these go back 28 years. I have kept them. They've broken out the back of a cabinet that I've got to replace this summer. But I kept them all in one place. So they certainly should be gone through and the best of them brought out. But it ought to be a big book.
Well, I heard a book there this afternoon. You know.
What's that?
I heard a book this afternoon.
Certainly you did. And there's a book every year. There were so many more of those poems I would have loved to read, but I couldn't take up the time. But there are some special, special poems that have come to this competition.
As poet laureate, as a Pulitzer Prize winner, Lincoln laureate, There's a long list of honors that you have
Well, I've lived long enough for that to happen.
and written well enough. And,
Thank you.
What in your life has made you the most happy? What's brought you the most satisfaction?
Oh, having children, I can always answer that easily and quickly. Having children is such a wonderful thing, or at least I found it so. Watching them change almost from minute to minute. And we had a good time with our children, my husband and I. We have a son also who's 56, old enough to be your father.
Barely, but could be.
And we had, as in my own first home, we had dinner every evening. My husband would come home. We would sit down to dinner at about 6 o'clock. And we would talk. We had such wonderful table conversations. Talk about what had happened to each one of us during the day. It was, I could just go on and on and on about that. We had fun. We'd go out driving, go out to Morton's Arboretum. Every season we'd do that.
You read some of your late husband's poetry there. I
Yes.
particularly like Autumn. I really love that.
I'm going to give you a copy. The copy, I still have it here. And I want you to read the long poem called My Daddy. You might not like the title, but it's very, very special and sensitive, and it's large. It's a little classic.
What was it like to be married to someone who was also a poet? We talked about how the children were involved in everything. Did that help your creativity and thus his?
I think so, and it made the children creative too. Or maybe they would have been just naturally, but they loved having the writers we knew come to the house, and they would talk to them. Let's see, what else can I say about that? My husband was very proud of me, and he always said, don't worry about sweeping. You get the idea for a poem, sit down, write it. Don't think about sweeping or cooking or dusting. He was very understanding in that way and couldn't be happier when, now I'm not saying, I mean, he was a human being. Of course, he might have thought in the early times that he would like some of the things that were happening to me happen to him. But he very soon decided he was more interested in, prose writing, and more than that, social science. So he has he has one big novel about 750 pages long. And I promised him if he didn't get that book published, I would. And I mean to do whatever I can to see that happens.
There's something that comes through, though, in all of what we've been talking about, that there have always been people who encouraged you. And
Yes.
You in turn are doing the same. You're trying to...
I feel that's a debt.
Tell me about that. Why did you...
Well, for instance, I wish there had been such a contest as I have when I was a young girl. There was nothing of the sort. I was encouraged, though, by one of the editors of the Chicago Defender. His name was Dan Burley, and he edited a column called Lights and Shadows. And I started sending poems to that, and he was very excited. He thought that I was quite talented, encouraged me to keep sending more, and ultimately I had 75 poems published in that column. So he was my first black encourager.
Is there...
Well, except for Langston Hughes, whom I had met at 16. But I was doing this at pretty near that age.
Are there any... it's probably unfair to ask, but I'll give it a shot anyway. Is there any particular poem or book of poetry that you would put among your favorites?
Well, I mentioned Old Coat Pipitech. I don't quite know. Let me tell you, I don't quite know how to pronounce that. But I thought it was Old Coat Pipitech. And I was at the University of Wisconsin, and you know how hip some of those students are. And a young fellow was sitting next to me, young black fellow. And I was talking about my love for this poet. And I said, and his name is Okok Pitet. I thought the P was supposed to be silent. He said, yes, I too have an interest in the poetry of Okok Pitet. So ever since then, well, I just want to share that with you. Did I answer the question at all?
Well, I was asking about your own poetry. Is there any era that stands out to you, or you're still writing?
Among my own poems? Mm-hmm. Well, I tend to like a part of this book, a part of another, but I would feel that A Street in Bronxeville, The Bean Eaters, maybe especially, In the Mecca, and Winnie, and I do have an interest in children coming home, so you see, I can't pick out just one, but those perhaps are my favorites.
You were talking about children coming home. Tell me about why that's so special to you, because it has a lot of different meanings for what kids may be coming home to.
If you don't mind, I'll read you a poem that will give you an idea of what I mean. This poem is called, well, there are almost two titles because I put the name of the child speaking up in the corner. And here, the name is Merle, M-E-R-L-E. He is talking. He's a boy. A lot of people have thought that was a girl, but no, that would really destroy what I'm saying here. And the title is Uncle Seagram, Uncle Seagram. And when I'm reading this on campuses, I often say, you know that there are many strange parents who name their children after whiskeys, and we do have Calvert, and we have Johnny Walker. I've met such people. And here is Uncle Seagram. My uncle likes me too much. I am 5.5 years old and in kindergarten. In kindergarten, everything is clean. My uncle is 6 feet tall with 7 bumps on his chin. My uncle is 6 feet tall and he stumbles. He stumbles because of his wonderful medicine packed in his pocket all times. Family is Ma and Pa and my uncle, 3 brothers, 3 sisters, and me. Every night at my house, we play checkers and dominoes. My uncle sits close. There aren't any shoes or socks on his feet. Under the table, a big toe tickles my ankle. Under the oilcloth, his thin knee beats into mine and mashes and mashes. When we look at TV, my uncle picks me to sit on his lap. As I sit, he gets hard in the middle. I squirm, but he keeps me and kisses my ear. I am not even a girl. Once, when I went to the bathroom, my uncle noticed, came in, shut the door, put his long white tongue in my ear, and whispered, "We're best friends and family, and we know how to keep secrets. My uncle likes me too much. I am worried. I do not like my uncle anymore. Well, I never read that poem at an elementary school or a high school without somebody coming up later and saying, that's happening in my home, or that has happened in my family. So I tell them, confide in your teachers, Perhaps some help can be found for you.
Yes. You're still writing?
Oh, yes, I'll keep writing. That doesn't mean that I finish a poem every day, but there's no day that I don't put notes to paper, some impression of what has happened to me or to others that day, what I've seen and felt.
What might give you an idea?
Looking at TV, somebody will say something stupid, and I'll write a response to it immediately because I always have a pen and a tablet ready. Or something beautiful, of course.
For instance?
Oh. Well, I saw some poets, several poets. One was Rita Dove. One was, a novelist too, N. Scott Momaday. And I'm trying to remember, I'm going to fail here, I'm sure. Can't remember, but he said something exquisite. And it inspired a piece of poetry that I'm going to continue. It's not finished yet.
Is there advice?
Or you'll listen to one of those nature programs. And, the ones that have music, maybe you feel that that's just a little prissy. But, but I love them. I love to see those nature spots and mountains and rivers and listen to the classical music. And they inspire ideas and pieces of language that I can work with later on.
What advice do you give to young poets about learning their craft?
Well, of course, I tell them they must read everything, and that includes Newsweek and Time and Jet. I have black friends who refuse to read Jet. But there is so much in any issue of Jet that you need to know about your people. And there is a lot of inspiration for poetry and fiction. So I believe in reading everything. Read between the lines, though. I always urge youngsters. Oldsters need to be told that, too. But
I'm coming to the end of this all too soon, I'm afraid. But why would you encourage people to write poetry?
Helps them to come to grips with certain aspects of themselves. To write it and to read it, both are important.
What has given you the most pleasure out of being a poet yourself?
Well, I could easily say expressing what I feel, putting down on paper, seeing it there, what I have been feeling, and feeling satisfied that at least some great part of what I felt or thought is there for others to look at, enjoy, maybe even learn from. But that is not why I would tell a poet to write a poem. No, that's not a good reason. I think the reason should be very personal.
To satisfy yourself?
Yes, that's what I'm doing when I'm in the actual process of writing, trying to satisfy myself. But once I have finished and said, it's done, then I'm happy to share it with others. There was a very famous poet, oh, what was that poet's name? Started with an E, and he had a son. He was involved with the University of Chicago. His son was named after him. Very famous playwright and poet. We were at the Art Institute with other authors at a round table discussion. And we were all asked to say what made us write. He said, I write only for myself. I do not write for any other people, just myself. So I sprang up. I guess I'm still a little sassy now, but then I had a lot of sassiness. And I said, that is not true, because if that were true, we wouldn't know anything about you, because you would have written, satisfied yourself, and put those expert pieces, because he was very famous, in a drawer at home, your desk. You wouldn't have bothered to show them to anybody. I said, yet we all know about you. You went and got those things published. So you do care about impressing others. He got very red. He was able to get red.
Well, we're all indebted to the fact that you put pen to paper.
Thank you.
I have certainly enjoyed this. This has been wonderful.
Well, you made it possible for me to enjoy it.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
I know I've said a lot of silly things,
Still a lot of good
but maybe you'll cut all those out.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bless your heart.
Fun.
Thank you for helping me through this.
I know you don't like to do it, and you've made it